Hi, this is Dave Lappin, and welcome to the Coherence Field podcast. I continue to be amazed at the breath coherence work I've been doing, not in a dramatic fireworks sort of way, but in a steady, grounded physiological way. What surprised me most is not the philosophy of it, not the spiritual language around it, it's the body level response. For example, I've noticed that even after a short period of intentional breath work, sometimes just a few minutes, my sinuses open up. And I don't mean metaphorically, they literally open. There's a shift, a clearing, an ease in the nasal passages that wasn't there moments before. And this has happened enough times now that it's no longer a coincidence. From what I understand, that opening is a sign that the nervous system is moving from sympathetic dominance, the fight or flight mode, into parasympathetic regulation, into the rest and digest, into safety. The body softens when it feels safe. The sinuses open, the breath deepens, the musculature unwinds. And what fascinates me is how quickly this can happen. We tend to think transformation has to be dramatic or long term, but sometimes it's a matter of minutes when the nervous system is given the right signal. And breath is one of the most direct signals we have. Another experience stands out. I've had massages regularly for years, many years. But one time after a massage, just one particular time, I experienced something completely new. My whole body felt smooth. That's the only word that fits. Not relaxed in the usual sense, not just loose, smooth. It was just as if the fascia throughout my body had become silky, like there were no internal wrinkles, no rough edges, no resistance. I'd never experienced that before, despite all the massages I've had. And what's interesting is that this experience occurred during a period when I'd been doing coherence work more consistently. And it made me wonder, was massage different? Or was my nervous system different? Because fascia responds to the nervous system. Tension patterns are not just muscular, they're neurological. When the system feels safe and coherent, tissue reorganizes. There is less guarding, less subtle contraction, less interference. And what remains feels smooth. What's even more fascinating is that I didn't set out to do coherence work. I didn't wake up one day and decide this is my path. I had always desired more clarity. That was the longing. Clarity of thought, clarity of perception, clarity in how I move through the world. Years ago, I remember being at a conference and observing a gentleman who was speaking. He exuded such clarity. It wasn't just that he was articulate. There was something coherent about him. His thoughts were ordered. His presence was settled. His words carried weight without force. And I remember thinking very clearly, I want some of that. Not his personality, not his platform, that clarity. At that time, I didn't know what that really meant. I just recognized it when I saw it. And now looking back, I realized that what I was sensing in him was coherence. Alignment between thought, nervous system, physiology, and presence. Interestingly, this current path unfolded in a way I never thought or would have predicted. It actually began with simple curiosity. I was using ChatGPT and asking questions about different spiritual paths, just exploring as I had done for many years. And through that exploration, something shifted. Not because the answers were magical, but because my inquiry deepened my understanding. And over time, that understanding translated into practice. Very gently, very organically. I didn't suddenly adopt a rigid discipline. It evolved. I began to focus more intentionally on settling the nervous system, on calming it, on signaling safety. And as I did, something subtle but profound began to reorganize. There was more stillness, more internal space, more clarity, and with that came coherence. For those unfamiliar with the term, coherence isn't just a mental state, it's a physiological one. Heart rhythms become more ordered, breath becomes rhythmic, brain waves synchronize more efficiently, and the body shifts out of survival mode. Coherence is not sedation, it's not dullness, it's actually a form of alert calm, grounded expansiveness. And what I've noticed, especially at this stage of my life, approaching 70, is how resilient the body can be when it's not constantly being driven by subtle stress. I still spring out of bed most mornings. There's vitality. And I suspect much of that vitality comes from reducing internal friction, from not fighting myself internally, from not running background stress loops that I'm not even aware of. Breath coherence seems to interrupt those loops. It resets the baseline. What surprised me most is that I didn't know that this was the direction I was being guided toward. If someone had told me 10 years ago, you're going to focus deeply on nervous system regulation, I probably would have nodded politely and continued doing what I was doing. But when I look at my life, decades of meditation, teaching Reiki, exploring subtle energy, this path aligns most perfectly. It feels like a natural extension. Reiki at its core is about facilitating harmony. Meditation is about reducing interference. And coherence work is simply the physiological expression of both. It's harmony made measurable, stillness made embodied. There's also something humbling about this journey. When you open a door, you don't always know where it will lead. Sometimes you think you're just exploring an idea, and that idea becomes a practice. And that practice becomes a shift in identity. Not in an egoic way, but in a foundational way. You realize your baseline has changed. You're less reactive, more steady, more internally smooth, if I can use that word again. And that smoothness isn't about perfection, it's about reduced internal turbulence. One thing I've learned is that clarity is not achieved by pushing harder. It arises when interference drops away. When the nervous system settles, that perception sharpens naturally. Thoughts organize themselves. Speech becomes clearer. Decisions require less force. And you don't have to strive for coherence. You allow it. You create the conditions, and the body knows what to do. So I continue this practice, not because I'm chasing peak experiences, not because I need dramatic results, but because the physiological feedback is undeniable. Sinuses open, tissue soften, mind clears, energy stabilizes, and there's a quiet satisfaction in simply observing that unfold. If you're listening and you've been exploring meditation or Reiki or breathwork, perhaps this invitation is simple. Instead of chasing transcendence, notice regulation, notice safety, notice smoothness, notice clarity. Sometimes the most profound spiritual development looks very ordinary. It looks like breathing slowly. It looks like sitting quietly. It looks like opening a door without knowing exactly where it will lead. And then one day you realize you stepped into coherence and it feels like home. In the next podcast, I will be giving you techniques to enhance coherence through breath work. Thank you for listening.